Very good. I actually think about that my show. Can we have phones? It's just a good. Thank you. Use the mic. Actually, screen entrance minutes. Screen time. I've missed it so much. My child. Or you felt. You have the Olympics for information.
To round 3 of the New Zealand Schools Debating Championships. The info slide for today's motion is as follows. Since World War II, Article 9 of Japan's Constitution prohibited Japan from having an army or using military force. From 2014, Japan's government, led by the late Shinzo Abe, has reinterpreted Article 9 to allow collective self-defense when an attack on an ally threatens Japan's security. In November 2025, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi stated that a Chinese attempt to seize or blockade Taiwan could meet this threshold to justify collective self-defense military force. The move is this House believes that publicly signalling its willingness to invoke collective self-defense over Taiwan is in Japan's interests. My name is Ben. I'll be your chair for this debate today. My pronouns are he, him, so I'll just introduce yourselves and then I'll get you to introduce yourself as well. So your name, your pronouns, and if you're comfortable being live streamed.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm the judge. And my pronouns are he, him.
And affirmative.
Hi, I'm Bella. I'm first staff, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, my name is.
Sorry, your final thing.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Speak second error. Hi, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm happy to be recorded.
Joshua third.
I'm Alex, he, him. I speak first and I'm happy to live stream.
Initially, she, her, I speak second in reply, I'm happy to be live streamed. I'm Charlie, I use he, him, I speak third, and I consent to being live streamed.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Speaking times are 7 to 8 minutes with POIs between the first and 7th minute. So I'll go once at 1 minute and again at 7 minutes and twice at 8 minutes, 3 times at 15. Reply speeches are 4 minutes long, so I'll say once at 3 minutes and twice at 4 minutes. With that, I welcome up the first affirmative speaker to begin today's debate.
Oh,
Am I speaking third? 2, 1. Anybody who has ever studied history can tell you that Japan and China has never been friends. They have a long history of disagreement, which they have, like, for example, China's rumors around Japan having nuclear waste, condemnation of Japanese actions during World War II, which they have never apologized for, and Japanese condemnation of China's aggression in Hong Kong and in the South China Sea. Point at where China is infringing on Hong Kong and it is directly threatening Japan, we think that it is correct and in Japan's self-interest to provide retaliation. I'm going to be doing 3 things in my speech today. First, setup. Second of all, on Japan's economy, and third of all, on Japanese public perception and overall pride. First, setup. What are Japan's interests here? A, we think that while we acknowledge that Japan likely do not want war, I just want to preempt that China is unlikely to ever attack Taiwan, regardless of what they do, for several key reasons. First of all, as much as China likes to be aggressive to project strength, the CCP has never been to war. They have never had a single exercise at the scale of which is necessary to even prepare to attack Taiwan. This means that China likely has very little faith that they can actually succeed at this. Second of all, we think that Taiwan just provides a valuable source of semiconductors that is incredibly important for both Chinese industries and the global stage. So this means that war and bombings and attack will straight up risk this, so China is unlikely to do so. But third of all, Taiwan is likely able to secure aid from other countries. Even if you believe that America is an unreliable actor right now, you should still believe that Trump has a proven incentive to protect money. And at the point where a lot of American industries are dependent on things like AI, which in turn are dependent on things like Taiwan's semiconductor chips, you should believe that China likely fears retaliation from other countries. But B, Japan just cares about the economy and how they're doing because this impacts their citizens on a day-to-day scale. C, they care about their appearance at a public stage. They have cultivated this identity as quite proud people, which means that they likely don't want to be here bullied by China. The trade-off that we have to stand for in this debate is that we achieve better overall ties with the rest of the world, with like the Taiwanese people and like the Japanese people themselves, at the expense of maybe slightly worse relations with China. I'll take a point before I begin my first point. 30.
Do you believe that it is a good idea to piss off a global superpower military?
I'm going to explain right later in this point why you will likely not piss off China. On to my first point on economy, and the premise of this point is that Japan is increasingly turning towards the West and Taiwan. So this is how they have made huge investments in TSMC, a Taiwanese-based semiconductor giant. It looks like how they're trying to grow the semiconductor industry and to expand their economy. The first thing I want to prove then is why the economic harm from China is weak, and no, I want to flag that this actually responds to the POI that they just give me. First of all, Japanese firms are already worried about the stability of supply chains in China. So this is the Iranian oil shock, how China is becoming more protectionist and less willing to import out things. So this means that like Japanese firms were unlikely to ever have been dependent on China because the relationship with China at that frame has never been good, which means that they've always leaned towards the West. China has never been their primary ally. But second of all, in the status quo, you should believe that Japan is already shifting away geopolitically from China. So this is like how during the Hong Kong crackdown, they criticized China, how they criticized China aggression in the Southeast like China Sea. Even if you believe that Japan wants to appeal to like China, I think it is far too late for that. I think that they've already like soured relationships with China. I think this is unlikely to be the tipping point in China deciding to like treat them really badly or to start this war. But I want to also characterize that China is unlikely to ever punish Japan harshly because they have never expected Japanese loyalty. Japan has always had American military base. They've always criticized China. They've always had these conflicts. Insofar as that there is never any expectation of alliance, it means that China was never able to punish Japan very harshly without cutting off all relationships entirely. Second of all, why does claiming to be willing to help Taiwan actually massively benefit Japan economically? And I want to flag here firstly that you just improve ties with Taiwan. TSMC is a very large industry that Japan is trying to expand to. It's like made out of Taiwanese companies, and they likely want this additional Taiwanese from like Taiwan. Why do they get better investment on this front when they claim to help Taiwan? A, note that like when they concretely signal that they are willing to help Taiwan, it makes Taiwan happier and makes them appear to be better geopolitical allies. So this means that investors are then more willing to shift to actually go to Japan to invest in Japan because trade seems more stable, because like tariffs and restrictions seem less likely, because those two just seem to have a better geopolitically and like just be more stable. But the benefits of this are twofold. A, you just get these wage increases, right? You get more people employed, you get these jobs, you get Japan having an expanded technology industry that just helps people on the ground with their standard of living. But B, you provide a unique benefit to the government. They get more tax revenue. It means that Taiwan is more likely to actually sell the computer chips to you because you appear like an ally, you appear like a friend. Even if you believe that like this should not work then, you still believe that Japan should care about Taiwan on a basic scale because they share quite similar cultures and they're just like quite similar in that way. But thirdly, you manage to improve relationships with the West. No rhetoric of, oh, we're willing to help like Taiwan if China ever attacks. It's something I think Trump would massively like because he likes aggression. He likes countries being willing to defend themselves militarily instead of depending on the US. This looks like how he is condemning allies in Europe, right? But depending so much on the US without willing to be increased military spending. When Japan actually increases the spending and makes themselves seem like more aggressive, it means that Trump is more willing to do things like keep US army bases in Japan because he sees them as like not like aggressively provoking him. As well as that, we think that other countries around the world also care about Taiwan, simply as I've already said, it provides a valuable source of things like semiconductors. So this means that there's just a lot of places for Japan to pivot and to seek help from, for example, Australia. Furthermore, we think that they appeal to other countries in the East. That is, Chinese aggression on the South Pacific Sea has directly alienated lots of countries there. When Japan appears like they are willing to like stand up against China and just be that actor who is willing to stand up to the bully, this means that these smaller countries in the East are likely to pivot to China and pivot to Japan and depend on them more for their industries. On to my second point then, on public perception. And note there's two layers to this point. First of all, on support from Japanese people. Second of all, a Japanese image from the world stage. On the top of this point, I want to frame that Japanese people feel like victims of Chinese aggression. So this looks like how approval of China was never high, and many Japanese people see China as like direct bullies in the Eastern Oceans. But more so than that, we think that there is a belief that Japanese people possess that Japan is like a chosen and a powerful people. This pride is why they have refused apologies for World War II actions despite international disapproval. That this pride is something that they care about. When China threatens Taiwan geopolitically, then this directly offends the Japanese nationality and culture because one, they feel quite close to Taiwanese, they just feel like China is attacking an ally, but two, they feel like they are directly under threat because Taiwan is just quite close to them and a threat to Taiwan is a threat to them. So what this means is that Japanese people are likely to be broadly supportive of this condemnation, which is something the Japanese government obviously cares about because they want the support of their people. The second layer of this is their image on the world stage, and we just think that they have a proven incentive to demonstrate national pride. Even if this incentive feels very intangible to you, panel, we think that you should believe that Japan's interests have often been one of like trying to demonstrate pride. This should be weighed highly because pride is such a key motive in human behaviors. People base their behaviors on what brings them the most like attention and gets them the most attraction. I'm so proud to
Speaker for that speech, and I invite the first speaker of the indicating team.
There are several key points of contention that already appear to be rising throughout the debate. These include international relations, the economy of Japan, as well as the pride of the nation as a whole. I'll be integrating my rebuttal to any rebuttal I have to first affirmative speaker throughout my speech, and throughout the rest of the speech you would expect to set up international relations and war. And my second speaker will be touching upon Japan-China relations. Okay, so first, it's characterized Japan. We agree with many of the characterizations of Japan, but to be specific, we believe that Japan wants to protect its reputation on the world stage. We believe that Japan wants to protect its people, and we believe Japan wants to protect its pride. And also, we do recognize that they are old enemies of China, as you see on the side of affirmative. But what we do believe is that we can meet the rest of these incentives to a far greater extent than the affirmative believes that they can. So, on setup, so two things. One, we have a bit of an alternative world that we have. This is a world where which Japan does, firstly, not make this public declaration that they would do something. But secondly, in the case where a conflict did occur, Japan would offer aid to Taiwan. This would look like medical supplies, food, water, shelter, etc. And it's specifically not military support. So we are asked to refrain the thank you throughout this right, and that is that we either show that it is not in Japan's best interests to signal this, or two, prove that our alternative is better, because that shows it in Japan's interest because it is ultimately better and it meets more of their incentives. Okay, so on the first point of international relations. So as the opposition tell us, Japan is incentivized by its honor, it's incentivized by keeping its reputation, and that reputation is a peaceful nation, it's a honorable nation, it is open to trade, it has a good economy, it is a civil nation, it is modern, it is a nation of the future. And okay, so what have two main mechanisms to say? This is the harms to reputation, this is harms to the economy in the world where we make this declaration. So reputation. In the world where publicly signal, thank you, that we are showing we invoke a self-defense collective agreement, then this is an aggressive move which clashes with Japan's peaceful reputation and nature. No, thank you. This, in turn, places an onus of honor on Japan to keep its word. And in case of if a conflict actually did occur, which we recognize actually is a possibility as opposed to your world, which you seem to believe that a conflict will never occur when we see conflicts erupting every day in this society, then Japan, if they wanted to back out, they're forced to do against this standard of honor. Now this leads to no, thank you. This leads to incredible stress this is incredible distrust in Japan from the international community. Alternatively, in our honor, we offer support to Taiwan in the case of a conflict actually occurring. We see that we are just altering our reputation, so we are benefiting Taiwan, and we haven't made any claims that we have to go against. And we don't have any of the costs of war. No, thank you. The second mechanism is the harms to the economy. So, what happens if our reputation increases internationally? So, if we are going against our nature as a peaceful, civil, and nation which is not trying to engage in conflict, then we see our reputation decrease internationally. This means that other countries will be less open to trade with us because they are less likely to trust us. So thank you. And this is also likely to cause a huge decrease in the perception of the public in the public world. And we recognise that a huge source of Japan's economy is not just these semiconductors which people talk about. We believe this is insignificant compared to the tourism side of Japan's economy. We see tons of people coming into Japan. We see lots of people going into there. They're bringing lots of money in from outside of Japan, and this it harms reputation because less people are going to come, and that means that less people are going to visit Japan as a tourist, and that means we are less likely to get money as a result of that. So outcomes. This means that Japan is less positive than we'll say. This means that less trade negotiation power, less influence on world affairs, less tourists, so due to this reputation, and our economy slows or possibly drops. So this means that people from Japan suffer from the effects of reduced economy, which include not being able to meet cost of living, and even like tourist businesses just decrease, slowing or dying over time. So, and Japan can't be influential on the world stage. So in our comparative world, our reputation increases because we'll be helping Taiwan. Our economy increases, our tourism increases, and ultimately that means the happiness and welfare of the people of Japan increase. And that's what we care about, protecting the people of Japan. I will now thank you why the opportunity was helpful.
NATO threatens retaliation if Russia attacks countries near them. A lot of countries are in military deals. Why would Japan's image on the world stage be tarnished by threatening to respond to a threat against them?
Because if a threat against Taiwan is not you place it as if Japan and Taiwan are directly bordered in a number on a map. Instead, it's a world where like a threat to Taiwan is a threat to a friend of Japan's in a way, but it's not a threat directly on Japan's soil itself. It's the difference between self-defense and collective self-defense. They're not trying to protect their border. They're trying to defend. An economy, and we see that we get much better benefits for our economy and our people when we do our alternative method and we don't make the public. So on to my second point on war, and that is Japan's military is Japan's military is nowhere near as substantial relative to China's. China's has more people, more weapons, more vehicles. These are significantly more, and they'll totally outgun us.
Here I.
There's some power. No, thank you. If Japan was to go to war, it wouldn't disinvent. Sorry, if Japan was to say that they were going to war, it would not disincentivize China in the slightest. It would act as it's like bringing a paper to defend yourself from a machine gun, right? It's not going to work. Japan it's claiming to it will not intimidate China, and it will also not it will not influence China's decision making anyway. So China will still do exactly what they want, and ergo it'll have no effect. So that means that there are no benefits to claiming this thing. We see that there are only harms to our economy and to our people and to our culture. So if Japan were to actually go to war, lose thousands of people, it spends a lot of money, they get slaughtered, there's no end to war. Destabilization of the population, the population period in Japan, because we actually see that a lot of young people are being sent to war, and it's already an aging population, which means that it's likely to lead to potential population collapse in the worst case scenario. So we see that, as I said, people die in this world where we go to war. The economy gets hit by the cost, and also we see that. And just a little bit of responsive to what they said in regards to economy. You talked a lot about how Japan already isn't doing much trade with China, but there's a lot more trading potential with. So there's a lot more trading potential in the future with China, which population is good, than with Taiwan, because Taiwan is a much bigger economy. I was like China is a much bigger economy. You see much more possible interactions with them, and whilst you claim that Trump will like the aggression, first thing, Trump will remain in power forever, and also Trump isn't likely to be influenced to a large degree by Japan making a statement, because as you guys have said, you guys claim nothing will come of it, so we can't see how we can get any benefits, because no aggression actually taking place, just a threat, which ultimately leads to harmful impacts on Japan's economy. You also claim that you'll get more tax revenue in your world, but we ultimately don't see this, because again, we're seeing decreases to our economy through tourism pathways, and we're also seeing decreases through losses of trade internationally due to the power decrease in reputation. You also noted there's we've always turned away from China, but we see that we've also threatening but there's difference between turning away from China and threatening to defend its enemy. So those are very different scenarios, and ultimately we win this debate because our benefits, the harms are too significant, and our alternative gets rid of benefits. Thank you.
Speaker for their speech, and invite the second speaker of the affirmative.
It is in Japan's best interest to do good for its citizens. This looks like boosting its perception, it looks like boosting its economy for tangible impacts of people on the ground, and it looks like improving Japan's security. A few things in my speech. First, on the negating push on Japanese relations. Second, on why we are able to get better security for Japan and why this is uniquely exclusive on our side of the house and how this is able to improve the life of people on the ground. First, Japan's relations. We hear a few main pushes from negating. The first here is it's going to go against Japan's peaceful nature. Look, I think we're just willing to bite the bullet on this, because even if you believe it is going to harm Japan's idea of being peaceful, we think this shift is good for Japan, because they are already taking steps in this direction. You see this through Takaichi's aggressive economic policy. You see this through the things that she is doing. Clearly, Japan wants to be seen as a stronger actor on the global stage. If this is a step we are able to take in that direction, this is in Japan's best interest. Second thing that we hear is that other countries are going to have less trust in Japan and they're going to trade less with them. premise of Gating's argument here falls short because trade with Japan doesn't entirely depend on the trust that other nations have in it, right? Because Japan is unique in the sense that it has special tourism, and it has semiconductors, and it has an incredibly advanced service industries, one of the best in the world. It also has a lot of technology, like robots, like new technology that other nations don't yet have. This means that a lot of places have a special dependence on trading with Japan. So even if they trust Japan as an activist, they necessarily still have to trade with Japan. The economic downfall we see just doesn't exist to that extent. Finally, thirdly, then we hear this idea that you're going to anger China. Val does a lot of explaining in her speech as to why this relationship is already very fragile, but also they're just moving away from China already. You see them diversifying their trade. Abe tried to do this during his term as well. They're doing a lot of things to diversify. They're doing a lot of things to make sure they don't have to depend on China anymore. They're already shifting away. This point just simply doesn't hold that much impact. But finally, we hear that there's going to be a reputation that improves because you're able to help Taiwan. But I think it is unclear how Negating is able to achieve this benefit to reputation if they tell you that they do this secretly. Because if there is no public signaling of you doing this, you're never going to receive the reputational gains. The whole point of it is that other people are able to see what you are doing. At the end of this, what you should believe is you cannot buy Negating's whole push on Japan's international relations being hard. Instead, we flip this because we told you at Balance that the public perception is going to increase. I'm going to extend on Balance material now. First of all, the public perception benefits are unique and exclusive things we are able to get on Affirmative because you are able to signal to China, to the rest of the world, and you are able to signal to Taiwan that they are no longer an actor that you can bully, that they are taking the start. You cannot achieve this on Negating if you do it secretly. And the impact of this is that they never get the investment in Japan, even if it is geographically close to China, because you never have the reputational benefits, you never change public perception. Before I move on to my split on how we are able to improve Japan's national security, I'll think.
Don't you think there's a marked difference between turning away from China in your trade and threatening to attack it if it attacks someone?
Yeah, I think there is a difference between turning away in trade and not being attacked by China, right? You are turning away from trade for China, you are also turning away from China in terms of national defense. Because when you are able to do this for yourself, you are able to improve your national security, you also signal to other people that this is something you're willing to do. Note here that this is what my split is going to explain in more detail, and the split is also responsive to a lot of the negating material we've had so far. At the top of this, I'd like to explain why improving national security is in Japan's best interest. And note, even though Bella gives you framing about why China isn't going to attack Taiwan, other actors who have no vested interest in Japan are still able to do this. Japan is still going to be at risk. Firstly then, in a world of increasing global tensions, defense for your nation is more important than ever. This looks like conflicts in the Middle East. It looks like volatile and aggressive actors like the United States that threaten violence, meaning that nations like Japan, who have weaker national militaries and national defense, care about improving their national security through improving things like their military force. Second of all, nations can no longer rely on foreign actors or even allies because there is increased instability. The best example of this is the United States because they are an actor that many nations relied on in the past, but volatile leaders like Trump have stopped funding international organizations, they've stopped and pulled out a security agreement, and they've literally screwed over their own allies. Note here that Donald Trump put tariffs on their ally, Canada, that pushed huge economic strains onto Canadians. I think this illustrates to you that you can no longer rely on these volatile actors, but also that international instability and security concerns are at an all-time high, meaning that Japan is going to care deeply about its national security. Okay. Why are we uniquely able to get this on Affirmative then? Note this is going to respond to Negating's idea that they are able to get defense privately. First of all, I'd like to whip balance material on how public signaling brings exclusive benefits to Japan, meaning it is in Japan's best interest to do this. Because even if you believe they are able to get the same defense on Negating, we get the exclusive benefit of defense plus the signaling effect. That means we're already on top. But look, the reason why Negating's claim to do this defense secretly doesn't work is because, first of all, it is perceived to literally violate Article 9, and countries all care about their security. So you have things like Five Eyes and security alliances that collect and monitor information. This means that the most likely thing to happen is that nations find out Japan has been secretly developing their military, and even if this is not through a security agreement, that can happen through like spies and internal leaks, stuff like that. What this means then is that when it is found out, nations get extremely agitated and very mad at Japan. They are likely to attack Japan for this. Obviously, Japan is a smart nation. They understand all the risks and they are not willing to take them because they are going to sacrifice their national defense. So they have to justify any steps they take to ramp up their defense spending. The only way they are able to justify this is through increased the only way they can justify their increased investment in global defense is by altering Article 9 because this is what currently controls them back. Note then that because this justification is logically prior to be able to actually increase defense spending and to justify Japan, Japan must publicly announce these alterations to their national constitution. So you have to believe that Japan cannot just do this secretly and in private. But finally, they can't do it privately because if Japan doesn't publicly announce it, someone else is going to find out and someone else is going to announce it instead. Because constitutional change on a national level is not something that just goes ignored on the global stage. So it is in Japan's best interest to share this information themselves and to do the public signaling themselves. Because any other act that does this in this debate is going to have competing or malicious incentives that affect how this narrative is going to be spread. What this explains is that Japan does need to publicly announce if they want to be able to control the narrative around this. And Japan can't get defense spending if they don't do this publicly, and even if they do, the best way to do it is if Japan is going to announce it themselves. So why does Japan's national security actually increase? Threefold. First of all, they now have a military force and they can actually advance their defense capabilities. Because when Abe changed Article 9 and the Article 9 interpretation, it meant they could have an 11% increase into defense spending. Now Japan spends more on their military than Britain and France. Obviously, there are huge benefits on a national security level to being able to do this. This looks having a seaborne strike force and it looks like having long-range missiles. It also just looks like increased cyber warfare capabilities. Another impact under this is that you can have more people signing up for the military because of the publicly addressed area of advancement that your country is going to focus on. Second of all, even given the volatility of the world today, you are just more likely to get aid and help from the United States and other anti-Chinese actors. In this debate, this looks like support in terms of funding or setting up military structures. Thirdly, then, you are able to signal to other nations that Japan is not a weak actor to be bullied. Look, this also uniquely unlocks ability for Japan to form alliances with other nations. This looks like the reciprocal access agreement between Japan and Australia, meaning they can operate militaries in each other's territories. These are all things that help Japan's national security. All of this is that Japan's national security is able to increase, meaning you protect companies, you protect people, you protect your citizens. What you have to believe is that we are the only side that is uniquely able to increase defense, and even if you don't believe this, we do it far better than negating because we employ the benefits of public safety and we do about being standard. Calvin.
Thanks, speakers for this speech. I'd just like to remind you to keep talking for hours during that stage of the meeting. And with that, I'd like to invite up the second style of the negating team to continue the hearing.
What did the sushi say to the bee? Wasabi. 4 things I'm going to do in this speech. First of all, a little bit on our counter model and what Article 9 actually looks like for the Japanese. Second of all, about whether this conflict is actually going to occur. Third, about Japan's image. And fourth, moving on to my substantive contribution about Japan/China's tension. Okay, first of all, a little bit about framing. I don't believe the movement said anything about there being an Article 9 that you can't give aid to another country if they're struggling. It's actually the affirmative team who's breaking Article 9 by implying we're going to keep this military beyond what it's needed for. They're implying that Japan's going to build up this military and keep it. And so that's actually the violation of Article 9, not the indication of sending aid to Taiwan. And please note our first speaker was quite clear on the fact that this is just giving medical supplies, food, etc., not broadcasting it to the entire world, but also not trying to keep it secret. So, first of all, will this conflict occur?
You know why?
We have heard from the affirmative team that China is never going to help Japan in trade anyway, so it doesn't matter if we do this. I think there is such a marked difference between moving kind of away from China as a major trade partner and saying that you will defend Taiwan, you'll even reinterpret your constitution to defend this country that China is at odds with. I think it sends a pretty clear message to China how you feel about China. We also hear from the affirmative team that maybe this could open up trade with Taiwan if you're standing by them. Well, you see, this is actually symmetrical because on our side, we're saying that we can help Taiwan should this occur. And we're managing to do this without picking a fight with the biggest bully in the playground. We also had actually heard from the affirmative team earlier that it's in Japan's interest to build up trade with the West. So why they're being really concerned about trade with Taiwan, that doesn't actually match up with that too much. And then finally, they're not actually too sure if a conflict will actually occur. They've told us, China wants Taiwan semiconductors, etc. But here's the thing, they're thinking really short term. Like, if something changes, Japan is still going to be bound to its promise to defend Taiwan. We've heard a lot about how the Japanese people have like a big sense of pride and they're going to want to stand by their promises of the past. Like, even over 80 years, they haven't wanted to get rid of a promise. So we hear that Japan is going to want to hold to this promise, and even if something could change, China could get more likely to attack Taiwan. They might, start producing their own semiconductors or find another source and not be so concerned about that anymore. So I think semiconductors is quite a narrow thing to assume that a war won't start over. Also, one of the mechanisms was, this has never happened, so, China's never attacked Taiwan, so it won't happen. And I think that's not a really good mechanism because just because something's never happened doesn't mean it won't. I'll take a PI now.
If China changes and is going to attack Taiwan, is it not in the best interest of Japan to have a developed security system in order to defend its ally?
No, I think it's in Japan's best interest to kind of stay out of the whole thing, altogether. Because we don't want civilians to get harmed, which I'll cover more in my spot point. So, the other thing is that if Japan does actually have this, start building up this force, this could get China to attack even earlier. If you're like, I was considering attacking Taiwan, and now this country that has no military to begin with is starting to build this up, won't I attack now before Japan has a big enough military to stop me? So we see that Japan building up its military will actually incentivize China to attack Taiwan, and therefore the affirmative team doesn't get any of these benefits we look strong but we don't even have to do anything. You're going to look pretty weak if you start a war. And finally, we hear from them how this is a really dangerous world to exist in a country, and therefore you should have a military. But it's a dangerous world, and this doesn't directly concern you. Why would we get involved if the world's in such a fragile state like they tell us? And furthermore, I had mentioned this at the start of my speech, they're making it sound like you get to keep your military forever. And we don't think that the Japanese people are likely to go against the constitution and be happy with a government that keeps the army forever, because I think it's pretty suspicious as the head of your state is our constitution says we don't have an army, but I kind of like to keep our army a little bit longer than we're allowed. And so I think it's actually going to erode trust of the government by the Japanese people, and that's going to not be good for Japan's interest. So, talking about Japan's image, we've heard from the affirmative team that making this army might appeal to actors like Trump, who are quite interested in war. But we've also heard that Japan has this stubborn pride. They're probably not going to want to align themselves with someone quite like Trump. I just don't think that's Japan's vibe. And also, Trump is not going to exist forever. This is, what's he got, 3 more years left in charge of the United States. It's not a long enough term impact in order to please someone who's not going to be in charge for much longer. And we've also heard from the affirmative team things like NATO exist to stop wars happening, so why can't Japan? NATO exists specifically for war, whereas Japan as a country has got other things to worry about. NATO is expected to stick its nose into war, whereas Japan is not. And also we see that the West is going to be less likely to want to trade with Japan if Japan is viewed as a really unstable nation, because you see that if Japan's building up an army to go to war, why would you put so much effort into trying to open up trade routes to Japan? You pick something that's least likely to get involved in a war and more likely to continue to trade with you and thus build up your economic benefits. So now moving on to my substantive portion about the tensions between Japan and China. So, not doing this is going to not escalate risk of war with China. If Japan aids Taiwan, says that we'll defend you if we attack Taiwan, it's directly opposing China. It is directly going against what China wants to do. So it's Japan, who has no army at the start and can only slowly build the army up, directly in the path of one of the biggest countries in terms of population in the world. I cannot overstate. Not only that, China's quite a secretive country. You don't know what they've been doing in terms of military preparations. You can't estimate very well how able China is to go to war. So if China does decide to attack Taiwan, and we've given you plenty of mechanisms for why Japan's forming of an army might actually incentivise them to attack, but if China does, then Japan's going to be included by default. They're going to stand by their promise, as both teams have conceded in their characterization of the Japanese people. Therefore, Japan isn't going to be able to defend itself well because it won't have a large army. And we see there's actually potential for China, once it's overtaken Taiwan, to turn its eyes to China as well. And we see that therefore Japanese civilians will be harmed by warfare. This looks like starvation. This looks like your house being bombed away from you. Pain, death. And this is especially dangerous for Japan, which has an aging population and therefore not a very large workforce, so wouldn't be able to build itself up economically. But even if you don't believe that China would then attack Japan, we see that even that the Japanese soldiers who get involved in this conflict are going to be harmed as well, and that's still a significant group of people that we should care about. So therefore, my contribution has proved that signalling this willingness to defend Taiwan will increase the risk of these Japan-China tensions turning into war. And that's to the debate, not in Japan's best interests to make civilian harm. Thank you.
Let's speak about the third speaker of the affirmative team.
Japan is at an immensely dangerous position right now. Its economy is stable. It has suffered with inflation for years and years. And now it needs some sort of investment. It needs to prop up its economy. The only way it can do that is when you are able to invest in tech. The only way that you are able to do that in the status quo is to invest in these resources. That is why we think we win this debate. NEG has been very NEG's mechanisms and framing has been very vague as to the fact that they claim that, it always has other industries, etc. But they haven't analyzed Japan in the status quo. And we tell you that Japan is extraordinarily weak in the status quo, and that is why it needs to do this immensely. The second thing to note here is the exclusivity. And this is the biggest part that I want to clarify at the top of the speech. What is exclusive on our side of the house is that this is a public message. Let's chat about why the method of doing private things will not work. The first thing to just say is that this is incredibly risky because the type of aid that you're going to get, for example, could be military aid. It's like ships, it's like nuclear missiles, etc. And obviously, China has massive amounts of surveillance and security within the South China Sea. It has literal eyes on Taiwan. So even if you were able to give this privately, we'd say that China was just likely going to find out anyways. That is extremely dangerous because if China finds out, the response from China is going to be even more angry because they're like, this is extremely risky. What are we going to do? Japan is secretly feeding Taiwan missiles. That is dangerous, and therefore the risk and exclusive things to their side of the house are actually dangerous for them. Comparatively, what did we tell you? We told you that public perception was going to be good. Why? Because it not only makes your own people happy, insofar as Bella explained to you the mechanisms of how people have a sense of cultural pride in the country, but we also told you that it is a good signal for the world stage. It is a good signal if you can signal to Australia that you're willing to stand up against China, that you're not going to give in to China's demands, and you're not going to trade with Australia anymore. That was the unique and exclusive benefit on our side of the house. That is to say, the signal is to the global stage, it is to all countries around the world. And insofar as we show you that China wants this economic development, then you already side for us. The only response to this idea about public perception was just that Japan was going to be a peaceful nation. But the first thing to note here is that not giving a signal is a signal in and of itself for their side of the house. That is to say, if you don't give a signal that you're actively against China, then presumably a lot of people will think that, you're just siding with China. You're not willing to speak out because you're scared China retorts and retaliates against you. So, therefore, we don't think that Japan is able to maintain its peaceful nation status because not responding is a response in and of itself. But secondly, we just said that even if we told you at Sarissa that we're just willing to bite the bullet. Because note when we weigh up these mechanisms, what happens? On their side of the house, the only economic harm that they give to us was tourism. The only thing that I'll explain to you why tourism isn't likely going to happen either. Compare that to our side of the house. In our best case, it's development tech. It's getting TSMC chips from Taiwan. If you are a person sitting on the stage of Japan's economic policy director, you're more likely to consider these things because tourism isn't likely going to decrease. What you should believe at the end of this question is that the exclusive benefit is the way in which we win this debate. This side is extremely dangerous if China finds out. Comparatively, on our side of the house, you get tourism, you get economic benefits, and that's why we win already. But now let's chat about the economy. Because as flagged in my intro, I think they've been extremely vague as to what the current status of Japan looks like. What I'm going to explain to you here is that Japan's current economy is extremely unstable, and therefore it needs to diversify and it needs to get tech. Why? One, we just say that Japan has carried a lot. It's things like deflation traps. It's things like these historical suffering in the past. So that means the current economy of Japan is terrible. But from Bella, we gave you reasons as to why you're going to trade is already weakening with China. Firstly, note that China is increasingly developing its own industries. Like in the past, I bet you there were 1 billion Toyotas in China. But now it's all dominated by companies like BYD. China is increasingly building its own industries because it wants to protect itself. But secondly, we just point you to look at Hong Kong. Japan was furious with how Hong Kong, with what happened in Hong Kong. China literally bullied Japanese investment in Hong Kong out. We think trade is weakening as such. So what you should believe here then is that trade is already significantly dying with China, which means that Japan has to turn to alternatives and it needs to diversify. Why were we able to fulfill both of these obligations? One, in terms of diversifying, the public signal, which is the exclusive benefit on our side of the house, simply allows you now to get advertising for your country, to get trade with other countries because they trust you now. But secondly, we told you that you're able to get more relationships with Taiwan. And TSMC is able to give its chips to Japan. TMC is able to build all of its factories in Japan. Why is this important and why is this exclusive? Because public signaling allows this partnership. Because any comparative, as we explained, not signaling is a signal in and of itself. So now that Taiwan is able to collaborate, you're going to get more investment. This investment is key because right now, the world is trending towards AI. The world is trending towards a world of tech. So this is where Japan needs to put its resources in. Okay. But what were the other reasons, in terms of what Bella explained to you, as to why you're going to get more economic investment? One, we told you that Taiwan's better, obviously. Two, we told you that the US cares more about you. But no, this debate was never just about the US. We tell you that there are other countries, Western countries, that are likely going to side with you too. Just look at Australia, look at Canada, etc. But also, we told you that countries bullied, for example, in Southeast Asia by China are just likely going to trade with you more. This looks like a lot of countries, for example, in ASEAN, where they've been bullied by China and they've been told that they aren't able to trade. Giving this signal allows Japan more access and the ability to trade with these countries. And that is obviously extremely beneficial because obviously that means on our side of the house, you get significant more amounts of diversity. And if you buy Sarissa's claim that the world is becoming increasingly unstable, then you all want to diversify your trade. You don't want to rely on one partner. Finally, then, your response to this was just idea of tourism. But I think this is a ridiculous argument. As a regular person, if Japan does a signal, I'm unclear why I'm just still not going to go to Japan. But I want to go to Japan at the end of this year. I don't think I really care if Japan does all the signaling stuff. But we just say it's safer. If you're someone from the Western world who wants to go to Japan, telling you that you're aligning with the West, telling yourself that you're aligning with Taiwan gives you more safety and allows you to go to the country even more. So I don't think the tourism thing was true, nor was it important. So what you should believe at the end of this question is that the economy is just far better on our side of the house when you're given access to Taiwan's TMC chips and when you're given access to diversify. Before I move on to the final claim to POI.
Do you really think that signaling you might attack a country is going to improve your tourism?
No, but tourism isn't going to decrease on your side of the house either because people simply don't know and don't care. Okay, the final clash here then is something that I've left little time for because we still haven't gotten a response to Sarissa's split, and I want to impact to you how important this is. We explained to you that China was never going to fight just because Japan did a signaling event. It's one country. There are several other countries in the world who've also spoken against China. So China has attacked them, but it's only a public signal. We have no direct or military threats. So I'm unclear why as to why China is suddenly going to invade the entire world now that you've implemented this policy. But even if you believe that they did, Sarissa explained to you why that was so important. Because amidst a world of global instability, having your own national army, having your own ability to securitize yourself as a nation was going to be so important. It was good because it meant that on our side of the house, we're able to protect Japanese citizens from increased global tension. We're able to get an army, and that's just good if a war does happen to break out. And we also told you that China never gives Japan any military support. So if you're able to get more support from places like America, that was just good. Even if we didn't win on a lot of these issues, I think we sufficiently proved to you that in terms of the economy and in terms of security, we win. These are probably Japan's biggest interests, and therefore I'm very proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I invite the third speaker of the litigating team to conclude consent.
So to start this debate, I would like to just go over our points again. So we have emphasised international relations, war and trade, and those are our main things. So the other team has made a few claims about our argument. They have claimed, for instance, that we never responded to the split point, despite my second speaker very, very clearly mechanising and responding to the split point. And they have claimed that we have no benefits to tourism. We would like to start off just with a bit on tourism. So our first and second have both mentioned how Japan has over the last couple of years tried to build up a very specific relationship with the rest of the world as being seen as this very peaceful nation. We see an emphasis on the aestheticized version of Japan. And the other team has recognized that Japan's economy needs to diversify. This is something we both agree on. And that Japan's economy needs something different that other nations cannot offer. The other team has proposed that tech is the option that no other nation can offer, whereas we do not believe that tech is mutually exclusive to Japan. We do not believe that Japan has some sort of patent on being the only ones who are able to develop tech. And as the other team has actually emphasized, other nations such as Taiwan are also developing tech. Whereas we believe that no, thank you. We believe that Japan is exclusive in that its land is only Japan's land. No other nation has access to that. We believe that because tourists are incentivized to go through Japan through this highly aestheticized aesthetic of being peaceful, along with a multitude of other reasons, there is a disincentive for tourists to go to Japan if they see that the reasons why they wanted to go to Japan are no longer being met. The other team has said that there is no war is going to happen. However, we believe that the other team's argument, at their best case scenario, war works on a short term. The other team is relying solely on the fact that there will be no war. They rely on the fact that there will be no war because they believe that China currently has no incentive to attack Taiwan as it stands. At their best case scenario, if we believe that this is true, we do not know that this will stand for the next 10 years. The other team has said that tech is developing right now. We do not know what the tech world is going to look like in 3 years, 4 years, 10 years. We do not know if China is going to have this incentive to not attack Taiwan because of the tech that they have that cannot be developed or taken in any other sort of way. So we do not see that this works for the long term. As it stands, we are making a promise right here, right now, that we are 100% going to help this nation if war occurs. Whereas we don't know what is going to happen in a couple of years. We can't make a promise based off of the reliance that there will be no war. We can never say that there will never be a war. So going into our point on international relations, we really clearly explained how Japan has relations with other countries based off of the way that other countries view them. We do not believe that butting our heads into a large conflict is the way to attract other countries or to attract investors. And we have also emphasised that China-Japan relations are in complete tense as the other team has agreed upon. The other team proposes that there is no incentive for Japan to not piss off one of the third biggest militaries in the entire world, and that it will have absolutely no ramifications. Again, we believe that this only works on the short term because, yes, at the best case scenario, China will not be incentivized to attack Japan. Currently, however, we do not know how this will pan out in 10 years in the future. We do not know if there will be no incentive further on. If there is a resource that it turns out later that Japan has that China wants, why is there no incentive for China to later go on and attack them? Because they have irritated them now. The other team has not thought about how this is going to affect Japanese people in the future. They have only thought about this incredibly short-term scenario based off the people who are currently in power and based off how things currently stand. At their best case, this works for the next 5 years. It does not work for the longevity of this nation. Additionally, we do not see many points on this side. We would like to view it.
What is likely? decrease anyways?
So we are not saying that war is likely, however, we are saying that you cannot guarantee that war will never happen. We are semi-neutral on the war happening, we are not guaranteed that it will happen. However, we say if we go to war, Japan is at an extreme risk in offering military help because Japan does not have the military force that China does. We are slaughtering our civilians. We are slaughtering our young population, which Japan does not have a lot of. Japan has major population issues, as my other speakers have touched on, and their population is aging. So you are putting young people on the front lines if they do go to war. If they do not go to war, we have made a promise that we will never be able to take back, that if there ever is a war, we will offer aid. And we see that we are pushing ourselves into this large global stage where everyone is looking at us for no reason. There is no incentive for Japan to go on and say, we're going to offer aid, we're definitely going to offer aid, other than just looking like they can offer aid. So the other team has said that the good thing about saying that we are going to fight these people is through saying that if we say that we're going to offer military aid, specifically military aid, it makes it look like Japan is tough. It makes investors want to invest in us. It makes it look like we're taking a strong stance for the West. We disagree because we believe this goes over the characterization of Japan, and that Japan has tried to characterize itself as a very peaceful nation, and currently as it is operating, it is very successful, and that is improving its economy very slowly with the tourism industry. The other team has said that they will bite the bullet on that. They will sacrifice Japan's entire self-image, as stated by their first and second speakers, because they don't care. They believe that they can throw away this entire current public image and build up a new public image on being the big kids on the block with the military, with the violence. We do not believe that this is a way to bring good things into this country. It is not a way to increase the economy. It is not a way to it is not a good idea to throw away what Japan has been working for so many years, to build up this image after so many years of war, just to throw it away to be one of yet another unstable and violent country who are threatening war at any point. The other team also made multiple jabs and pokes about how we are going to be entirely going against the Constitution, which is not true. We would like to remind the other team that the Constitution specifically states that Japan is prohibited from having an army or using military force. However, this has been reinterpreted that we are able to help other people in situations where it is necessary. However, the other team has entirely ignored this constitution and proposes entirely that we are going to be creating a military for Japan, and that is what one of their points rests on, is breaking the constitution. The other teams, one of their major points relies on that we are breaking the constitution to provide Japan national security. However, we believe that they can't just break the constitution. That is not how that works. If you want to break the constitution, that is a different conversation about the importance of national security. However, we believe that this military, as it currently stands, would not be allowed to be continued, so we do not believe the point of national security at all. We would also like to go back to our alternative world and explain why our alternative world is better than their world. They have made jabs at our alternative world, saying that we are going to be secretly offering, military aid, in which case we would just be doing what their side of the house is doing, but sneakier. However, my first speaker did very specifically state we would be providing things like medical aid, we would be providing food, water, shelter, etc. And he specifically stated that we would be providing no military aid. Absolutely no military aid would be offered, and that is what we stand for. So we believe that in doing this, we are still strengthening our relationship with Taiwan, which is what the other team has also stated is important, which we believe. We agree that strengthening our relationship with Taiwan is good. However, we do not believe that offering them something that wouldn't even be helpful in the terms of conflict, as we've explained how weak Japan's military is, would be helpful. So on our side of the house, we see that we are not butting our heads into a conversation where we do not belong. We are not putting ourselves at risk on the international stage. We have never said that we are going to be silently offering aid. We have said that we are waiting to see how this pans out. We don't know if they're going to go to war. In the case at which they go to war, we will reevaluate and then claim that we are going to be offering aid. But we see no reason why we should make a public declaration when we have no idea how this is going to pan out, or when this is going to pan out, because this could pan out 10 years in the future, and our side of the house believes that it is incredibly irresponsible to make a promise and claim that you do not know if you will be able to keep multiple years down the road. So on our side of the house, we can see that we are offering aid. We are still getting those strong relationships with Taiwan. We are still standing by the public image that Japan wants of being peaceful, of being a nation that is going to be kind and offer others aid and help. And we are still standing by our allies and achieving all of the other benefits that the other teams proposed, about standing by our allies, about staying true to what we believe in, about good things for the citizens. However, we are also getting that benefit of not going to military and not breaking our constitution.
The speech, and I invite the reply speaker for the
Hey guys, Japanese car parts are falling down outside. It's raining debts and corks. I'd like to go through what we see as the two main outcomes of this debate, i.e. war and no war, and how our team can prove that life turns out better for the Japanese people and Japan as a whole in both situations. So let's look if war does occur. Now, first of all, note that this is a very likely outcome, as we've given you this mechanism that Japan starting to amass its army might incentivize China to attack before Japan has the ability to defend Taiwan. And so we see that this is probably the more likely option. On the affirmative team side of the house, we see we're stuck in a war that we probably started, and that we are actually currently losing, what is it, did I say, 11% of our budget to the military. And we're also losing like a large amount of our population, which we don't have a lot of young population left. And we're struggling, and we might be attacked by China, as we told you clearly in our second split point. So we see that this is not a very great future for Japan in this case. Whereas on the negative side of the house, we see we have Taiwan support because we're sending them humanitarian aid, not weapons, as we clearly said. We're sending them humanitarian aid to help them out. And therefore Taiwan is going to have good feelings to us, but without us having to be involved in a massive war. So we're going to have less death of civilians, less horrible harm to civilians. And sure, we might have like a small good public signal on the affirmative team side of the house. However, we see that there is no need for Japan to send out a signal on every single international conflict, and that they're allowed to remain neutral. And that's, as we told you, this might signal China to attack. So maybe Japan looks a little bit stronger on their side of the house in the world. It's like, good on you, Japan, but we see that this is outweighed by the actual harms of being involved in a war with such a superpower as China. All right, what if we have no war? This is what the affirmative team is really pushing. So they've told you we're going to have an army, just in case. Okay, you're going to have an army in a volatile world, yes. You're also going to have a lot of civil unrest because you're going against your own constitution, holding on to an army for a long time, as we've clearly told you again and again. And then they've also tried to tell us that they're going to have an increase in tourism. Now, let me ask you, if you were considering a holiday to a country, but that country promised they'd get involved should a conflict occur and the conflict looks quite likely, would you go to that country? No, this is going to disincentivize tourists, as we've very clearly told you. And whereas we see on our side of the house, while there might not be like a marked increase in tourism, there is the potential for that, so much more so than if you are potentially about to get into a war. So we see that tourism can better grow on our side of the house. And this will help build up our economy. Please note also that on the affirmative team side of the house, they're channeling 11% of their funds into keeping up this military. So they're going to struggle with their own economics because it's a significant amount of your budget. On our side of the house, Japan would be at peace. They wouldn't be having to have an army ready. They wouldn't be having to give aid like this if there was no war. Japan would have a wonderful, peaceful existence, which is what its people want. And notice also the affirmative team has consistently gone against Japanese people's character. Japanese people are proud of their country. They're proud of their ability to welcome tourists and get new technology. They're proud of building themselves up from the dust that they had in the 1940s. They're proud of that. They're not about to throw it all away by starting a war and defending another country. And so we very clearly showed you how we have at best benefits on our side of our house, at worst no change from the status quo, whereas the affirmative team at best is going to be absolutely losing economically, and it's going to be struggling should a war break out.
Thank you for their speech, and I invite the leader of the affirmative team to conclude this debate.
Three things in my reply. First, I'm going to talk about the economy, second, on security, and finally, on public perception. Firstly, on economy, I'm going to spend this time on this because I think we are clearly on top in this point. They've not sufficiently responded. When the world's entire technology and AI industry is dependent on small Taiwan, they will never punish Japan for wanting to protect their own country and their ally. Japan puts up memorials for their convicted World War II war criminals against international condemnations. Their public image is never going to get worse by opposing a bully. We explained to you down the line the economic gains we are able to get. And here I'd like to whip all the balanced material to people on the ground and to the benefits we get to Japan's economy. Because when you're able to get increased investment in your nation, you were able to get jobs for people on the ground. You were able to increase people's standards of living. You were able to fight against the harms of deflation that Josh so eloquently describes to you, right? Also, I think the only response that we ever get is that you can get these AI chips from other places. I just think this isn't true when TSMC literally accounts for 60 to 70% of the world's production of semiconductor chips, and it literally accounts for 95% of all the high-tech chips, right? It is no alternative for you to get. NVIDIA depends on TSMC supplying it. I think empirically it is just true that Taiwan is going to have a huge hold over this, and you ought to believe that there is a huge economic benefit to Japan. But look, on security, the aggressive and volatile leaders of the world don't wait for you to get involved in conflict. They seek out conflict on the whims of their political agendas. They can put tariffs on their friends. They can snatch up leaders literally overnight. So it is always in the best interest of nations to develop a very strong national security system to protect themselves from these shocks. On the ground, we're the only side that is able to increase Japan's national security. Look, the pushback that we hear from negating was that Japan is able to do this privately. We explained why this is highly unlikely to happen, and we proved the huge risks. The negating then pivots at 2N and says that they are going to fund Taiwan through humanitarian aid rather than develop the military. Note that this failed to meet their burden in this debate because it wasn't just about helping Taiwan, but most importantly, it was about what was best for Japan's interests. Both sides in this debate are able to help Taiwan, but the reason why we win on advantage is because we just do it far better. First of all, military aid is way more direct. If a country invades you, no amount of money is going to save the soldiers, right? Because you still don't have the guns, you don't have the people who know how to fight. But more importantly, Japan is able to improve their national security, and this is going to win us the debate because we are able to prove that this is the best interest of the Japan. Negating them sufficiently responded to this because the only claim that they made was that there are risks to angering global actors and it breaks the Constitution. First of all, the Constitution was broken ages ago. This debate is not about breaking the Constitution, it is about amendments and changes that you make now. Second of all, the framing we gave you from first explained that was incredibly unlikely. I'd like to whip all the balance mechanisms that got responded to. We explained structurally why conflict is very unlikely. The third, you never fight war alone and you always have alliances. Something we uniquely get on advantage when you push Japan away from China, you were able to get Western support. This was crucial for negating to contend with because it is something we are able to uniquely and concretely win on. Because to explain down the line the importance of national security, I think it is already very clear, so I'm going to extend on weighing this in terms of the long-term benefits of Japan making this shift. Because you were able to set up enduring systems that protect Japan into the future, there are no alternatives that a negating gives you, we have to win. Really quickly then on public perception, first, they never explained why this is a tipping point for conflict to occur, and insofar as conflict is already unlikely, I think there is no way for negating to win on this. But look, negating is incredibly uncomparative because even if you are sending aid to Taiwan, China still knows what you're doing. China is still going to be angered. There's no reason for China to not attack you anyway. If them to fail to make this distinction, they have to fall on this front. Finally then, we are uniquely able to get international support, and even in our worst case, if Japan becomes aggressive and volatile, this is in the best interests of Japan. Even if the world bursts in flame because Japan is now aggressive, this is what Japan wants, we are able to support this, we are able to win today's debate. I've never been prouder to affirm.
I think the speaker tonight, everyone on this who contributed to the debate. With that, I invite you to the forum to take a hand.
I've also called the Lund criteria. It's in like the Wolseley common room. Did you know what that? I think it's that one. But feel free to go there, grab some food, and we ran. No. I can see more. Okay, so